This is LBC News.
Well, joining me now live on LBC News is Natasha Hausdorff, barrister as an expert in international law. Thanks very much for your time this afternoon, Natasha. So, is Iran using international law to try and justify what we saw last night?
Well, it certainly claimed this when it cited Article 51 of the UN Charter, but I think it's pretty plain that what was on display yesterday was a flagrant violation of international law by Iran. There have certainly been calls on the UN Security Council to convene to make that clear, and I'd also expect language coming out of the UN Secretary General appropriate to what is a flagrant violation of international law and an attack, a serious attack on a UN member state.
So we are going to be seeing that meeting of the United Nations Security Council later tonight. What can actually be the outcome of this, though, other than words? We'll see condemnation, but what actual action could come from this?
Well, indeed, when we're listening to the words, and indeed those of the Prime Minister referred to just now, there's an awful lot of talk about de-escalation. And it seems to me that's exactly what Iran seeks to achieve, certainly with the statements it's put out in the wake of this serious escalation. I think we probably need to step back and ask ourselves why Iran felt able to strike Israel directly last night with hundreds of cruise and ballistic missiles and suicide drones. I'd suggest stepping back and asking why now, so that we can properly understand that evolving dynamic. Iran said last night it was attacking from multiple fronts. It has, of course, also been attacking Israel continuously for the last 6 months through its Hamas and Hezbollah proxies. So why the dramatic escalation now? Well, I think for weeks, Israel's allies have been attacking Israel over its defensive action against those Iranian proxies, especially criticising Israel's approach to Gaza and pressuring it to stop defending itself there. And indeed, propagating, I would even say, a concerning amount of misinformation about Israel's conduct. And that's plainly served to encourage Iran. In that sense, there is an argument to say that the West may bear very serious responsibility for this escalation, and that would, if anything, mandate a change of approach. Many are suggesting there needs to be a strong response, that Iran needs to be punished for this flagrant violation of international law and this serious attack in order to re-establish the deterrent. That is especially important in the context of the Middle East.
In terms of, you've suggested it's kind of broken international law. I'm sure Iran wouldn't necessarily agree with that. But moving forward, what happens? They get taken to The Hague. We've seen situations like this with Israel recently, and it just becomes a protracted conversation.
Well, in this context, I think there's a strong argument to say that there has been an ongoing armed conflict between Iran and Israel, in fact, for many decades. And so the appropriate response in the context of that armed conflict may very well be the sort of response that has been considered by the Israeli cabinet, that's also been referenced in your introduction. All of this, of course, is in many quarters being attributed, and indeed has been attributed by Iran, to the 1st of April attack that Iran has attributed to Israel. This was a strike against, that killed, importantly, two IRGC generals who were commanding Hamas and Hezbollah forces against Israel over the previous months. It's being, I think, frequently erroneously referred to as a strike on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, in Syria. In fact, this, by all accounts, appears to have been an annex not far from the Iranian consulate, but a building that was being used by these IRGC forces as they are continuing to direct their terror proxies against Israel. It's a situation in which Iran has been playing its hand and seeking to test how far Israel's Western allies will allow it to put the pressure on Israel and to scale up its attacks. And in that context, I think it's clear that there needs to be a reckoning. I think I'd be very surprised if that wasn't followed through. If it's not followed through, it will be undoubtedly because of the position that the United States has taken on this. And rather than learning, I would suggest, from the mistakes of the previous weeks, where we've had the American administration very critical of Israel, putting a lot of pressure on Israel, which, as I say, has undoubtedly served to encourage Iran. What we've seen even overnight and this morning is President Biden suggesting that Israel may be able simply not to respond to this attack, even describing the Iranian regime's failure to do major damage with its 350-odd missiles as a win. And I think it's important to be clear that 9 million Israelis spent the night being terrorized by a rogue state. That cannot be described as a win, even if the extraordinary feat of Israeli defensive technology on display last night, for the first time we saw the various protection systems, Iron Dome, Arrow 2, Arrow 3, and David Sling, all working in unison. The complexity involved in that technological success cannot be overstated. In many circles in the defence industries, it's being termed a technological miracle. But nonetheless, I think what is required here is a reaction, a response to Iran's intended damage, which was wide scale, as opposed to what it was actually able to achieve, again, because of the incredible technological initiatives that Israel has been taking over many years now.
Thank you very much, Natasha Hausdorff, barrister for Six Pump Court Chambers, an expert in international law. I appreciate your take on this afternoon here on LBC News.